$1 billion. Yeah, let's just dive right into this explainer by chewing on that completely unbelievable number. That is the projected cost of a single frontier AI training run by the year 2027. Now, keep in mind, we're not talking about building an entire company or outfitting a brand new data center for that price. We are quite literally talking about the cost of pressing enter just one single time to train a new AI model. It's staggering. So welcome to the War Room. Today, we are analyzing the incredibly complex global intelligence war that's going to definitively shape our economy for the next 30 years. You know, everyone keeps casually calling this a competition, but the sources we're unpacking today make it abundantly clear. This isn't just a competition. It is a structural, full-blown war, and the primary weapon is artificial intelligence.
Here is our strategic briefing map for today. We'll hit 1. The weapon is compute. 2. Mapping the 8 factions. 3. The predicted 2 winners. 4. Defending the physical infrastructure. And finally, 5. Your future in this war.
All right, kicking things off with Section 1. The weapon is compute, and really why this war is different from anything we've seen before.
You see, much like the race to build the railroads or the power grids back in the day, this is fundamentally an infrastructure race. But there's one massive structural difference here, perfectly illustrated by Wright's law or compute compounding. Because AI isn't like capturing an oil field, right? The prize doesn't just sit there once you get it. It is a compounding weapon. If you use your compute correctly, you train a better model. That model then naturally attracts way more users, who in turn generate vastly better data, which then trains an even smarter model. So the gap between the leader and the loser, it doesn't just grow linearly, it widens exponentially with every single cycle.
But here's the kicker. The crucial point is that just stacking hundreds of thousands of expensive GPU space heaters in a room doesn't actually work on its own. The actual binding constraint we're looking at is high bandwidth memory, or HBM. Think of it this way. If the GPU is the raw processing muscle, the HBM is the nervous system telling that muscle exactly what to do and exactly when to do it. Ultimately, controlling that high bandwidth memory means you control the actual ceiling of how smart these models can possibly get.
Moving right along to Section 2, mapping the 8 factions. Let's look at the battlefield layout.
This table right here gives us our current threat assessment. It shows us that each of these 8 factions brings entirely different weapons to the table, with completely different motives and, most importantly, critical weaknesses. We've got the sheer consumer dominance of OpenAI, the enterprise lock-in from Microsoft, Meta's aggressive open-source tactics, China's extreme efficiency, Google's deep infrastructure, Anthropic's big safety bet, Musk's vertical integration, and of course, the rule makers themselves, the regulators.
So let's zoom in on a few of these, starting with OpenAI. Despite their incredible consumer success, they are boasting 900 million weekly active users. Their internal projections show a jaw-dropping projected loss of $14 billion for 2026 alone. Basically, they're spending an estimated $1.35 for every single dollar they earn. That is some profound structural financial fragility, especially when you're fighting a war on 5 different fronts.
Now, let's pivot and look at Meta's strategy. There's this common misconception floating around that Meta is just releasing open-source models out of some altruistic ideological commitment to the community. Well, the source material argues quite differently. Llama is a highly calculated weapon. By just giving away near-frontier models for free, Meta effectively collapses the pricing power of competitors like OpenAI. They are literally doubling their CapEx to something like $125 to $145 billion in 2026, purely to ensure no single company can build a monopoly interface layer that sits between Meta and its 3.56 billion daily active users.
Let's pull back and look at the global stage for a second. We can see a really stark contrast here when it comes to China's faction. Look, China knows it cannot currently win the raw chip race. They are structurally blocked from getting their hands on advanced 3-nanometer manufacturing equipment. So, what do? They execute a brilliant strategic pivot. They're weaponizing algorithmic efficiency. By training near-frontier models like DeepSeek R1 for a verified cost of just $294,000, they are aiming to completely flood price-sensitive global markets, essentially building a long-term infrastructural dependency on Chinese AI.
And then, man, we have Anthropic, which just presents this fascinating paradox. Anthropic bet their entire company on safety, ethics, and auditability. And you know what? That exact moral framework earned them unprecedented enterprise trust. It rocketed them to a $30 billion revenue run rate in under 3 years by securing Fortune 10 clients. But those exact same ethical guardrails, specifically refusing to allow autonomous weapons without human oversight, got them temporarily blacklisted by the Pentagon as a quote-unquote supply chain risk. So the very thing making them billions in the corporate world created massive friction with literally the largest procurement budget in human history.
Finally, we've got to look at the regulators. As an impartial briefer here, it is just objectively fascinating to note how the regulatory faction's safety friction ends up creating the exact same strategic outcome as our geopolitical rivals. Think about it. Western safety advocates want deployment slowed down for ethical reasons. China wants Western deployment slowed down for strategic reasons. It is the identical outcome, generated entirely by accident with zero coordination.
All right, Section 3, the predicted 2 winners. Who is actually going to survive beyond 2030?
So the analysis strongly suggests that out of all these 8 factions, only 2 are ultimately going to survive to truly own that foundational intelligence layer. And it essentially boils down to this: Google versus the Elon Musk stack. On one side, Google has an unmatched, deeply rooted digital substrate. We're talking 25 years of proprietary data, highly efficient 7th-gen custom chips called TPUs, and built-in distribution across 3 billion Android devices. Pitted directly against them is Musk's totally unprecedented vertical integration across the physical world. He's got Tesla's real-world driving data, Starlink's global connectivity, and that massive Colossus supercluster housing over 555,000 GPUs. It is quite literally digital dominance versus physical dominance.
Which brings us to Section 4, defending the physical infrastructure. Let's do the physics pivot. Because, look, in a true war, digital capability relies entirely on some incredibly vulnerable physical structures. When you have a single data facility drawing 2 gigawatts of power and housing roughly $18 billion in silicon, like that Colossus cluster down in Memphis, you really have to ask yourself, how safe is that physical choke point? These aren't just normal data centers anymore, folks. These are highly strategic national assets.
And that concern builds directly into this brilliant defensive concept highlighted in the sources, the terafab. The basic idea here is to use advanced tunneling technology, stuff like the Boring Company makes, to move these massive compute clusters entirely underground. Doing this naturally provides intense shielding from extreme weather, blasts, and EMPs. It totally secures the facility from aerospace surveillance. And crucially, tapping into the Earth's natural baseline temperature offers massive thermal cooling savings. In a global intelligence war, just leaving your most valuable armories exposed on the surface is becoming a profound, maybe even unacceptable risk.
Finally, Section 5, your future in this war. Let's talk career, money, and family.
Let's bring this war room briefing home, right? What does all this actually mean for you? Well, step 1, for your career, you've got to focus on irreducible human skills. Your value in the marketplace absolutely must be something that an AI cannot just instantly synthesize and apply. Step 2, for your money and investments, look heavily toward those physical infrastructure winners, the companies laying the actual pipes, power, and concrete for the next 30 years. And step 3, for your family, you have a brief closing window right now to prepare the next generation for a radically shifted economy, one where intelligence itself is abundant and practically free.
So, as the cost of intelligence effectively approaches zero and the immense raw power to generate it consolidates into just a few massive, potentially underground physical hubs, I want to leave you with this final critical thought to ponder. Who will own the intelligence layer of your future? Will it be a digital giant, a physically integrated empire, or maybe something else entirely? Take some time to think deeply about where you stand in this shifting landscape. Thanks so much for joining me in the War Room for this explainer, and I'll catch you in the next one.